Thank you. So I find you have a way of explaining things that are really eloquent and better than anybody out there. So
Well,
thank you for your time. I really
appreciate the kind words, brother.
no, it's true. And just a quick summary. How did you start in this whole experiment laser thing?
Well, the truth is that it's a very long story that stretches over 10 years. And you'll excuse my slur because I literally just had a root canal, but I think it works
Oh
fine.
God.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
no, it's fine.
So sorry.
But, oh, no, no, no. It was, I actually don't know why people complain about it. It was, I didn't feel it.
Really?
Yeah, I didn't feel
Oh,
anything. Maybe there's like different complications for people. Mine was like, I didn't feel a thing. Um, so yeah, it's a very long story that stretches over 10 years. And that's why the documentary is basically going through all the details of how I arrived at it. But the short version is that I simply had a kind of an experience in DMT that even though I was very experienced with it until that point, that didn't match anything that I thought was possible. It was just too real, just too much realism in that experience. And then I said, okay, well, then it just made the idea that it's a hallucination completely untenable, completely.
hmm.
And I said, okay, well, hold on. Like, if it's real, first of all, that's the biggest news in the world immediately. Like, that's if it in fact is real, that's the biggest news in the world. I know that people already, contemplate that aliens are visiting here, all that stuff, but that's different than having direct encounters, right? And then, especially when you're talking about a substance that allows you to have these encounters on a regular basis, and it's completely democratic in that anybody can partake. I mean, yes, it's illegal in many places, but there are places where it's legal and you can just partake in it. So then I said, okay, well, there must be a better way to ask these questions because so far everything I'm seeing is that science is a little bit too rigid, which is understandable because science is also safeguarding against a lot of nonsense, which I'm actually very grateful for that. It's the reason why we have these incredible devices through which we're speaking right now. But at the same time, I feel like spirituality also wasn't really cutting it because they were kind of too vague and esoteric, and everything is kind of like anything is anything, you know? And I said, okay, well, there must be a better way to approach this. So I'm going to try and answer that question myself. I said, what can we be more open minded about certain kind of possibilities, but keep the rigor of science intact? And that's essentially what got me on this journey. And then I basically started working from first principles. I said, okay, what do I know for sure? Well, I know, however it is, I know light is involved because I can see it with my eye. So light must be involved, or whatever light is, right? And then I said, okay, well, if the space is real and there's a difference between it and just an anthropic soup, then that means that it has some rules by which it's working. So what are those rules? What can they be? But I know for sure they have rules. That I know for sure. If it's real, it would have a geometry, even if it's not regular three-dimensional geometry. It's some geometry that we can measure and we can say something about mathematically. And it probably has a topology and it probably has some entry point. The key insight that I had was there must be a space. If it's real and we sometimes see it and sometimes don't, that means we're penetrating some kind of a boundary, all of us. Can we find that one boundary where it's the same for all of us? Not similar, but the same. That was the key insight. And then I tried all kinds of, fancy ideas. I like thought about it became really fruitful when I started thinking about how quantum computers work. And it's not like I'm some kind of an expert in how quantum computers work, but I knew enough to know that at least the people who helped develop the science that allowed for quantum computers to be real, specifically David Deutsch was on my mind. He's the guy who wrote the Deutsch equations, which basically allows us to make certain calculations that makes quantum computers actually give us some information. Otherwise, it would kind of be complete nonsense. And to his mind, he's a big proponent of the many worlds interpretation. So I said at least one, but I also know that many other serious physicists, not some fringe scientists, but consider the many worlds interpretation to be real. And what I was thinking is like, well, okay, well, if they can send a signal between parallel worlds that are actually real, that means that there's some information, some bits of information moving, and the between the worlds. And the only moment in which this happens, and this is how quantum computers work, is that in the moment of decoherence, in the moment where a particle, instead of being the instances of itself across the entire multiverse, it kind of decoheres from the wave function, and then it becomes part of your world line, right? But in that instance of decoherence, one bit of information is being transferred because it's now, instead of one thing, it's now part of one world line, right? So I started thinking along those lines, and it's not like I had a strong grasp on the mathematics of the thing or anything like this, but I had enough of conceptual clarity about this, which was like, I know quantum computers work. I know we had them at that point already, even though they were very, very rudimentary. But still, we know they function, right? So that means that at least gives me information. That at least tells me that there's a there that is worth investigating seriously and not just like in terms of a philosophical concept. And the second I started thinking about this, so light and how we can potentially send signals through light between the realms, because I thought that DMT space is some kind of a parallel world of some sort. And the second I started thinking like this, all of a sudden, all kinds of hints started appearing for me. like, like very things that are just like truly kind of mind-boggling when you're in it, when it's happening to you. Obviously, if you try to explain, which I tried, if you try to explain kind of like what happened step by step to people that are, more mainstream scientists,
Right.
they just kind of, you can hardly describe this as a methodology, right? You can't really, it's not a methodology. It's more kind of like a very strong hunch and you kind of follow it. But really, like, and I'm not trying to be facetious about this, but I thought about this very deeply and actually realized that really when you look at the way that science is done, yes, the part of the toil where you're kind of like testing things, right? That is very repetitive and it kind of like seems like this, like, okay, we'll try this variation. And for that to work, you need to control the experiments very carefully. So you really have to only allow for one change of one parameter. Otherwise, you're not really getting any data, right? So I understand. However, the ideation that rides behind the experiment, so like kind of like the conjecture itself, does follow a very similar trajectory of thought that I was going through, which is kind of like you kind of feel the vibe of what's more plausible or less plausible according to everything that you know. You cast a very wide blanket, and then the things that kind of make sense, you try that direction. So in that sense, I would say that I was following a scientific principle. It's just it was too wide to then describe as a methodology to another scientist, right? And that's essentially what kind of got me on that ride. And eventually, after many years after that, after many things didn't work, all of a sudden this laser idea just kind of like I somehow coherent light, specifically the emphasis was on 650 nanometers at the time, but now we know that all light waves, all frequencies work. But I think it's, well, we can get into like the minutia of why that is, but essentially the process that I was following was kind of like this combination between these very wide and broad hunches. I was willing to sample from a possibility space that scientists wouldn't be comfortable of doing because it felt nonsensical. Like, why would you follow a number you see on the ground as anything that gives you real information? Well, look, if you're postulating that there's a larger world and this other world is somehow communicating to you, all of a sudden the idea that they send messages through making your attention linger on a particular item for just a little longer than you otherwise would have in a crucial moment. So like when you're already thinking about a subject matter and all of a sudden there's a certain level of meaning and profundity that is happening, and all of a sudden you see this number and your eyes really linger on it for a second. Yes, from a scientific perspective, this is just like delusion, bamboozlement, and nonsense. But if you are willing to travel there for a second, it's like, well, why did that happen? Now, given if this doesn't amount to anything, then it is nonsense. But it did amount to something. And that's exactly the point. They kind of like these little breadcrumbs I was willing to follow did amount
So what I'm hearing from you is that if there's any consciousness in other dimensions, let's call it that way, they communicate with us through intuition.
attention.
Attention.
Yeah, I feel like intuition. I hear you. I hear you. And I would even agree with you. But I think a word that is less tainted by bias is attention.
I just wrote a book, and that's why I'm like freaking out. I just wrote a book about consciousness, and it's called. And the main point is that if there's consciousness or this big consciousness in other places, the key resource is attention
Mhm.
for us.
Yep.
So, oh wow, that's a synchronicity. There you go. And
Or,
that's how I got here.
it's just true. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, that is a shock for me right now, but I'm gonna try to keep it cool and let's keep going. So that is really interesting, and I think a lot of what you're verbalizing is that the problem with studying consciousness is that it's subjective. Like you are only within you, and you can only experiment your consciousness. It will be great to jump to a plant or your brother, whatever, but you cannot do that. So whatever you do, it's not gonna fall into science in so many ways.
I think that there's a conversation to be had about the definitions of what subjective and objective are, and
Okay.
depending on the use in the situation, these terms can actually be interchangeable. I would define as what we call objective as the aggregation of all subjective points involved in agreement.
Right.
So it's consensus, right?
It's consensus. There you go.
Exactly. So, but it always first relies on your first person experience. Always, always, always. This is a point
Exactly.
that when I have this conversation with physicists, it's almost like they've been in it for so long that they can't see the fact that there is no such thing as perceiving even the equations that are giving you objective information. Because yes, mathematics, if we define it as the language that describes pure relational values between things, okay, but where does that live? You have an experience of interacting with that equation and with the logic of the equation and what it means and the communication with other people. All of it is moving through your subjective experience. And that's not a cop-out, by the way. If you really look at that, it's almost like there are certain kind of axioms that physicists are aware that they're using them as axioms, and they understand that currently those are just the axioms we use because of fill in the blank. The experiment shows us that that's the most regular thing that occurs, so we kind of go with that. But there are certain axioms that I would say that they're blind to. They don't realize that's just a convention. One example of this would be there is this very common theme among physicists. And by the way, just to be clear, I revere physicists. I think they're our front line of human understanding. I admire physicists deeply. But there is this like very strange component that physicists do, where they would say, when you start describing the nature of the essence of things, right? And you would say things like, okay, we know it's not an electron, it's just an excitation in a quantum field, but what is that field? And they would say, well, what do you mean? It's the potential of that property that we call, let's say, electricity. So it's the electric field. Yeah, but you're saying it's a combination of the electromagnetic field, and when looked at through a particular apparatus, it behaves as if it live in an electric field. And then you would say, okay, but what is that? And they say, you can't ask what is that, because it is literally the potential of that thing. That's what most physicists will tell you. And you say, 1 second, please. Is there a quality to it? They say yes. Okay. What is that? And they would say, well, it's the potential of that. I'm like, potential. The word potential means the probability of something occurring. What is that thing? And they would say, no, it's just pure probability. I'm like, this doesn't mean anything. Here's how I can tell you this philosophically. There's a difference between it and not it, correct?
Yeah.
Yes. Therefore, it is a something. I'm not asking you to define it as a physical thing. I'm not that naive. However, it is different than nothing, correct? And it is different than other things, because the electromagnetic field is different than the weak force field. So, like, right? So they have different properties. You're begging the question. And I think what is being missed here, this is not just like kind of philosophical toil. The fact that this axiom, which can be replaced, is kind of the lens through which they perceive everything. What is being missed is that automatically what this tries to do is to define everything as the result of these potentials. And what it's missing is that there is a possibility to see the world from such a perspective that things actually have essence. In fact, the essence of the thing is the real thing. In other words, imagine if, and this is almost incomputable for most scientists, but imagine if the redness of red, the actual quality of red, not only it's not a human perceptual concept, it is literally a fundamental thing in existence. And then the description, like the experience of red, is actually the fundamental thing, because experience is. And then the description around it and how it relates to certain occurrences like wavelengths and things like this, those are the derivations of the mind and not the other way around. It's actually, and that is a very difficult point to drive home, but it is the only way to eventually land on a map that I think is more accurate, by redefining the, well, I guess idealism, which is that the mind and the mental stuff, like the perception itself, is the fundamental building blocks of what reality really is. And does it carry more weight? Ultimately, only time will tell. And it will tell us if we can do things way more extravagant than we ever could by adopting this frame versus holding the other frame. Well, now it's a more fundamental tool, because it's a map that describes the world in a more accurate way. And by the way, there is no real distinction here. Like, you actually did the world. I don't expect the world to look any different in terms of how we experience it, whether it's mental at bottom or whether it's physical at bottom, and somehow the mind arises from it. It would appear the same as far as I'm concerned. But it does diverge in terms of function around certain extreme cases. And psychedelics, I would say, they're allowing us to enter these extreme cases. They are the event horizon of, where you have extreme conditions in the universe, like the singularity of a black hole, things like this. It allows us to see very unique cases, because the laws of physics are being stretched to their limits. So we can kind of see the different, like, where all of a sudden quantum states and classical states kind of start flowing into one another, which are very bizarre cases. But those cases tell us so much about what, in fact, the fabric of reality really is. And I think that what psychedelics do, they are essentially that kind of perturbation to what we call the mind space. But it's a real thing. It's actually a fabric of a sort, the mind itself.
Right. When I think that when we try psychedelics, you actually die a little bit, and that makes it clearer but that we have a saying here in Ecuador that it reveals the veil of Maya, the veil of reality just disappears a little bit, what we call reality here, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we can, as we go to the other place or other places, you can perceive more stuff. Of course, you don't die, you come back, but psychedelics, definitely, if you've tried them, definitely that's what it feels like.
Well, I would say you're anchored to your body, and that is an important component, because I'm not denying the realism of physical matter. I think that is a mistake as well, because I currently am convinced that the mind is a fundamental, like, building block of reality itself, but that does not remove the need to grapple with the puzzle. Why is the part of the mind that appears to me as a wall so regular that I can't really put my hand to it. It's not the same as I'm just imagining it. It's not the same. There's a regularity to it that there's some portions of the mind space that behave in such a way that, for all intents and purposes, justify calling them the laws of physics. Is it just the kind of bubbles of local perceptions that the mind kind of dials itself into in certain periodic range, and then it creates a schema that appears as hardness and all these things? Those are real questions that we will have to grapple with if we want to take this seriously.
So let's go back to the basics.
Sure.
Can you explain us fast what is this molecule DMT, and how many kinds are there? What do they do?
DMT stands for dimethyltryptamine, which is a neuromodulator that exists in many living things. Maybe it exists in all living things. I'm not sure. Our body synthesizes it, our lungs, our brains, I think the liver as well. There's two main different kinds. There's NN-DMT, which is DMT with 2 nitrogen molecules, and 5-MeO-DMT, which is 5-methoxy with 1 oxygen. They are radically different in terms of how they feel phenomenologically. NN-DMT feels, the best way to describe it is that NN-DMT feels like Transformers 3 million years into the future. 5-MeO-DMT feels like you're meeting God. And it's more of a feeling than a visual. NN-DMT is extremely visual. The visuals are so convincing, they seem more real than our reality. And when people say DMT, they usually mean NN-DMT. Those are the main two kinds.
Got it. So now let's go more to your experiences. Looks like, and I have a couple of questions from people here. First of all, is it harmful if you do it a lot?
Funny, Dr. Gallimore just wrote a book whose title is an homage to a famous Terence McKenna quote called Death by Astonishment. Terence McKenna used to famously say, it's only dangerous if you fear death by astonishment, which I think is very accurate. So it's so astonishing, and in the full sense of the word, that you just lose any ability to just even interact with it conceptually for yourself. It's so jarring that is the only, I would say, danger, that if you're not very comfortable with novelty and weirdness,
Yeah.
it's not for you, because things can get so weird and so far out there. We're not talking about some funny thoughts. We're talking, you lived in a house your whole life, and one day you open the basement and it's Narnia. It's just a different world, and you're like, what? Like, you had no idea your brain can do this. And again, we're not just talking in terms of content. It's not like, triangles that look like giraffes that just like nonsense and things like this. No, we're talking coherent content on its own right. But the formulation of the content is of a flavor that you not only have never seen before, you had no idea it is possible to perceive in that way. It's like you've never seen color, and all of a sudden you see color. It's of a qualitative kind. And the whole thing is like that. So it's not just visually, it's the sounds, the feelings. You feel multidimensional feelings. You feel feelings that can only exist on another planet, or like it's just like it's so bizarre and yet very familiar. This combination of these things is the thing that makes it hold the title as the king of weirdness. That's why DMT is so strongly revered by psychonauts, and also the one that got serious researchers' attention from the ontological perspective. It's not just, is it good therapeutically? It's also, is it actually pointing to something fundamentally different in the world that we didn't know before? So is it dangerous? It can be to your psychology, but luckily it's also very short-lived. So 5 to 10 minutes is basically the full trajectory.
I've heard, and I was reading that there was a lot of people, or this trend of people saying that they win. Looks like you go into this, let's call it realm, right? Some people get kicked out for some reason. Do you figure out why? They just cannot have the experience anymore.
I think so. I think there's always the same amount. I think it's an algorithm thing. So I think Chase Hughes recently spoke about it, and because on a very big podcast, and since then I see everybody talking about it. So I think it's an availability of information thing. It was always the thing that a certain percentage of people sometimes all of a sudden just get kicked out. I don't know if they actually get kicked out, by the way, but something happens and they close the tap from their side, and we know this to be a fact. Like, this happens. We know this. Even Gallimore said that he was, I believe he said he was present during this time, or maybe he was talking about somebody else he knew was present during this time. But a woman was undergoing an extended state study with DMT, which means that it drips intravenously. So there is no way she should not be having an experience, because she's full on. The tap is open. And the aliens in her experience just told her, okay, you're done. And she was fully back. And the drip is still going. So we know under laboratory conditions this happens. So we know this is real. What does that mean? I have no idea. There's a lot of speculation. I'm going to be going back into the space quite a bit in the next couple of months to do some of the comparative studies. I'll report back and I'll tell you if it happens to me. My intuition tells me that something is happening here with when a video about something about DMT goes viral, a lot of people attach themselves to the proposition. I think a lot of that is influenced by that. That's my take, but I'll find out. Maybe they are kind of closing the doors for now or something.
Oh, wow. Okay. So you're having conversations with these entities. How many are there?
Three: Jay, Bob, and Johnson.
Oh,
No.
okay.
How many species you mean?
I don't know. What do you see there? Can you
It's
explain
kind
it
of
to
like
us? Can
so.
you?
I'll explain to you how your question is interpreted in my brain.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
When you ask me how many are there, it's like asking if I ask you, you went to New York and then you come back and I say, how many are there? That's the
Okay.
same question. It's like
How many kinds of beings are?
same question if you go to New York, would
Same
you
thing?
know?
Oh God.
Yeah, it's like you go to multidimensional New York. So would you know how many people, species? It's a zoo. Like I don't think anybody. I'm very suspicious when people give these like very clear answers about how many species, how many. Like it just sounds too much for me. It's extremely confounding in the just the scale of it. Like the scale is so immense. Sometimes people get jarred. You ask about danger. Some people get pretty destabilized just from the scale. Like the perception of scale is so big that people just it's too much for them. So imagine multidimensional New York. I don't know to say. I can tell you that I've interacted with at least 5 or 6 different species. It's clear to me that there's a lot more, and I don't quite know the right thing to describe the relationship between them. If I understand correctly, there are species that kind of specialize in things, and if I understand correctly, the what we would call the insectoids, they have like these insect shape. They're very large insects of all kinds. They are the ones that are responsible for weaving physical realities. I don't know why that is, but they're definitely responsible for my experience of our reality. So they're simulating our universe and many others. So it's almost you can think of it like you would have a contractor that basically kind of you have a bunch of companies that run simulations, and they would be one of the species that does that, and they're running our universe. But there is a larger picture. There's a larger picture than that. There's kind of like simulations all the way up, so to speak.
So I hear you on a TikTok lately, and you said that you saw you asked, take me to the ultimate reality, and you saw a loneliness, like somebody was really lonely. What was that like?
Yeah, exactly what it sounds like, the ultimate loneliness. We always think that there's always another thing behind the corner. Imagine a situation where you know without a shadow of a doubt that you're the only thing that exists, and also you're all powerful, which means that you can do anything. But that kind of is completely meaningless because there's A, no one to share this with, and B, there's no like value to it because you just do anything, right? And that is an extremely gutting feeling. It's
Wow.
literally gutting. It's like because you're alone
Right.
forever, and it's like and there's no answers. It's like that is now. Do I think that necessarily means that this obviously upsets a lot of people because they're like, what do you mean? Like you tell me God is lonely? It's like that's so ungodlike. Well, a lot of biblical qualities that are attributed to God are also very ungodlike, right? Like jealousy and things like this. All of it is obviously human projection, and I do think that there's probably a big component there of the ego still being very much attached while you're having this experience.
Right.
So the truth of it might be, yeah, that the kind of God is aware of everything, that there's nothing outside of it, and all of that. But the interpretation of the sadness and the loneliness might be coming from my personal ego. Like that's also, but like I said in the clip that you mentioned, I took it to be basically that the reason they showed me this is because I had the hubris of asking. So basically, their point to me was basically exactly what I asked for. So they said, okay, you can, if you want to know, you can know, but what are you going to do with it? What is the point of you knowing this? That's your interpretation of it. Okay, good. Now what? Is it helping you live a better life? Is it like, what is it doing? That's what I took the lesson to be. So from that moment on, I basically brought myself to be a much more, uh, I put even more of an emphasis to stay in the present moment and just allow things to kind of unfold.
Got it. Got it. So what do you think is going on? Is this a simulation of God trying to understand him or herself?
Yeah, essentially. I think reality, and when I say reality, I mean everything. I mean the multiverse is the answer to God's question. So it's the answer collecting itself. It is the process that everything is involved with to answer the ultimate answer or the ultimate question. I think more accurate representation. So I think what question should be asked to get the ultimate answer is really the what is the thing about. But I think that it's about that, and at the same time honing the skill of being able to just let go. And again, this is a very contentious ground because if you speak to a religious person, it is blasphemy to assume that God somehow is not already perfect, right? Now, I understand and I have sympathy for the feeling that there's It's almost like you're wronging reality by postulating such a limitation to God. But I think that if God created a world in which certain processes are allowed to happen, well, this is one of them. And one of them being, what if God is not perfect? What if God is the thing that tries is God is the thing that has the potential to in fact become perfect, but the process by which it happens is exactly what we're seeing. Another idea. So just to answer your question directly first, I think that what is going on is that there are these levels of perception that beings can occupy throughout the levels of existence, and that they are determined by of um, what kind of perceptual spaces you can occupy. So if it starts from how much information you can process coherently and what you can do with it, right? If you have a computer screen open and you have a bunch of code written on the screen, a dog will look at the screen, wouldn't even know there's anything there. Like there's no computation happening around anything interesting with the screen because it doesn't smell like anything, and it doesn't pull the dog's attention. The dog is wired to do something else. You put it in front of a monkey, it changes a little bit. The monkey will definitely notice that, especially if there's things running on the screen, the monkey will definitely notice that something is going on. It might not take interest as much after a few seconds when he realizes there's no food there, but it would grab the monkey's attention more than the dog's, right? Then a human would look at the screen. We would know because we live in the modern world. We kind of know what code is and like what this, but unless you are a software engineer, you still don't know what to do with that. You just kind of know what it is, but there's not much you can do with it, right? Software engineer would look at the code and say, I see what they're trying to do here, right? So there's levels. And all of these levels are determined by what kind of information you're capable of processing, at what speed, and on what level of coherence and scale, right? And I think that's what separates the species. And I think what's going on is that when species are a little bit too close to one another in some operational space, but too far from one another in terms of ability of interacting with these informational patterns, then the one that is more advanced in the regard of being able to interact with more advanced informational patterns start infringing on the development of the one that is less. And because it's exponential, at a certain point, up to a certain point, beings can kind of coexist in a very kind of like this beautiful biosphere. But at a certain point, when the mind space becomes too developed, the exponential component makes the escape velocity so much, the escape trajectory so much faster. So you become, even though we're close here, this goes so much further here, right? And then you start jarring the species right next to you. And the ethical thing to do would be to remove yourself from interacting with them as much as possible. So I don't know if you know this, but there's some, I think macaques, I forget which monkey, but they were observed to do certain things that kind of more advanced, like fish with spears, things like this. Kind of like things that you saw in the very, very early stages of Stone Age. Not even Stone Age, say way before that, like whatever we were like 4 million years ago, right? Hominids, whatever it was. So like, so if in fact this is them kind of starting to entering that evolutionary trajectory, at a certain point they will develop certain cognitive tools that will allow them to notice more of what we do, right? More kind of like the person who's looking at the screen and seeing the code but doesn't know what to do with it. Because the
Right.
amount of confusion that we will cause, like, and we will grow even more exponentially. We'll go to other galaxies and build enormous machines and all these things. So that is too jarring for a species that is trying to evolve into these first steps, right? So if we could, the ethical decision would be we would make ourselves invisible to them so they can just evolve in peace, right? But at a certain point, because it's also unethical to hamper their development, at a certain point when they're going to catch on, so to speak, to the more universal trajectory, now we're no longer at liberty to, if we can no longer escape their observation, so we can no longer remove ourselves from their space because they're just too evolved, they would notice us anyway. But now we also can't really stop them from evolving because that's also unethical. Well, now what do? We have to develop some protocols by which we meet them halfway. We gently notify them that we're actually also exist and we're right there, right? And that feels very much like, I guess, what the UFOs are doing. It's like gently letting us know we're the monkey in this case, obviously, to anybody who didn't track that analogy, but we are the monkey. They are the more evolved species. They removed themselves from our perception for as long as they could, and now they can no longer because we're just too evolved now, and we start to understand. So they are helping us to gently understand. That's what I think is going on.
I wanted to ask you specifically about the code that you see with these lasers.
Mhm.
They seem to be Hebrew or
I mean, it appears closest to Hebrew, Japanese. I don't think it's any language we know. I think it can appear as many things, but I think the coherence of it is what really strikes people. That how solidified in space it is.
so one of the interesting things is that a lot of people see the same things, right? Do you think they are biased, or how do you experiment on
No,
this?
I can tell you that it's definitely not that because I even ran it the other. I mean, obviously, if you want to run it seriously, then you're going to have to do a way more robust tests, obviously, and we will do that. But I can tell you from the quick and dirty, it's to my mind, it's not what's going on because I even told people to look for something else on purpose to kind of throw off their scent. And then they still came back and said, I didn't see that thing you said, but I saw these weird Japanese looking things. So it's like it always is that. It's not it's it and by the way, if the concern is priming, well, why does it always end up being that and nothing else? So the second you see it fully, even if I guide you and I tell you and everything, how come it doesn't change to anything else? It's one direction. It's always that one thing. So I don't think priming is the issue here.
Do you just see letters or do you see
The
stuff?
Yeah, the code is like I'll be honest, it's like secondary. We're just saying code in the wall is much more appealing in terms of the interest, but it's actually very secondary. The story isn't the code at all. The story is the structure that it makes. It's you're looking at some kind of a hyper object. The question for me is, what are we looking at? What is that? It's not so much like people who constantly want to decipher it, and I always say, decipher what? You don't know what that is. Like when you decipher something, you already kind of have information about what you do. Is it you're breaking? Even when you're breaking code, well, you know there's a secret message you're trying to get to, right? You're trying to decipher an old human language. You know it's a human language. That's a lot of information about something. We don't know what this is. We have no idea. We don't know the first thing about it. We don't know if it's code. We don't know if it's language. We don't know. We just know it looks like some kind of a hyper object that is made of these coherent, tiny symbols. But they have enough of meaning instantiation in them that puts them squarely in this space of no, this is clearly intentional. This is not like random. But what's interesting is the solidity and the space permanence of the object itself. So if it's arranged in a certain way, right? It's a field of these buckyballs made out of these codes, and they're also arranged in these columns that are moving around. And when you look at that, and you and me looking at that, we can point to the same place. We can say, oh, this is happening here, this is happening there. There's millions of characters, so that's kind of hard to do in real time. But you can point to things that are more kind of operationally there, and you can agree on what they're doing, which is that already kind of puts it over the top. Now, obviously, if we really want to substantiate this, you're going to have to be very clever, like, and that's what we're working on now. We're going to try and build certain models that will be able to create a Rosetta Stone of people's perception. So if you look at the character, and I'm going to see what it looks like through EEG, the model will kind of register that's what it looks like when you're doing it, and then I'm going to show you the letter in different conditions on a paper, and I'm going to see is there like a signature to how you see that character, right? And then I'm going to run it across
Mm.
individuals, and if across individuals there's similar signals when we're measuring it, well, now you have news, because now if you're saying it's random, well, here it is. It's not random. There's a signal clearly coming through, and everybody's seeing the same thing. And maybe even if we get lucky, sometimes not in the so far future, we will have some more advanced versions of Neuralink that will allow us to just project whatever people see, or at least record from the cortex directly. I mean, if you can do something like that, now it really makes it easy, because then you can actually have
Yeah,
ChatGPT analyze like you can actually analyze the patterns.
oh wow. Well, thank you so much. I guess I run out of questions right now. It's a lot and it's really interesting. How this has Can you tell me what has been your biggest realizations out of this
That's a big
so
question.
far?
Yeah, I
Because
think that
looks like you're sitting like, in a looks like you're sitting in like something incredible. Don't you feel like a little like, oh my God, we really need to go out and figure this out
we are.
and talk to the world?
We are doing that.
You are, right?
Yeah, there's
Hmm.
a certain pace with which it happens, and there's a certain pace that is natural and a certain pace that is unnatural. People constantly were telling me when I was starting, like, here's all the ways in which you can make things go more viral. I'm like, that's not if this is the biggest news ever happened, how people react and how fast, it's part of how comfortable we are processing this information collectively. That's very clear to me. So it's not about pushing the message. The message is there. The information is there. Our aim with Code of Reality, which is our official nonprofit, is to actually investigate and find clever ways to test this in as much clarity as possible, and then share that information with the world. And then, get more interesting and very smart people involved. And it's already happening. The movie that we're working on is going to be dropping this year, and then obviously that will generate a lot of interest. So you can generate interest around the subject, but you also need to deliver something more than just like, here's the thing. So I'm not necessarily pushing. There's a pace to it. There's a pace to it. What you're really alluding to is the fact that if in fact I'm right, I want to be charitable to the people who think that, this might still be kind of just like a big misunderstanding. That's fine. I'm of the mind that if it's really real, that it needs to go through the ringer of science and needs to get through all the tests and, pass all of them with flying colors. Fine. There's a certain natural, harmonious flow to the pace with which this needs to occur, which will take into account people's state of minds, how comfortable they are with certain kinds of information, how they process it at scale. If you just, deliver the ultimate kind of like, people might not even process it in the way that, like, it's not. People are very good at compartmentalizing what they're understanding.
Right.
They're willing to let
I
it.
found that. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Aliens is a great. Alien is a great subject about that. You know, we see all these things, we film them even better nowadays. And one friend told me once, "Yeah, that's great, but tomorrow I have to go and work." I
Yeah,
was like,
exactly. That's
"That's
your friend actually has a very strong insight because I always say to people that talk about the disclosure, how much thought did you put into what it would be like the day after? Because it's always fun to just build towards the thing that you don't have to do anything about. But when you have to put in work, as in you have to kind of figure out what would be your orientation to the world the day after, that requires you to do more than just open your phone and look at reels. And that people don't like as much. There's this fun little talk that Terrence once gave. I quote Terrence McKenna a lot. I thought it was one of the greater geniuses of our generation. And he says people spend so much time searching that they rarely stop to consider what they would do with it if they find it. And when you truly find it,
right."
I can tell you that it's a real. It's like the dog that chases the car, and the car stops, and the dog is like, "Oh, okay, now what? Now what? What do you do? What? How does that inform everything else?" I think that what is hiding behind
Mhm.
people's fascination with these topics, like aliens, like some people believe we're going to be ascending to 5D very soon, things like this. I think there's a component of hope that something will come and just save them from whatever misery they're going through. So I think the implied promise in the
Suffering.
aliens, yeah, is that when they will come, everything is going to be different, and I can't wait for it to be different. Now realizing it's not going to change a one bit for you. You are the only one controlling how everything feels for you in the moment, and you can do it right now without any aliens whatsoever. And in fact, that was the Buddha's big realization, which is that you are your own master, and you have to walk the path, and no one can walk the path for you. No one is coming to save you. You have to do it for yourself. And when you have that attitude, all of a sudden everything becomes a gift, including if aliens come. Then it all of a sudden becomes like a much more extravagant, thing than what it would have been if it's just like a quick fix of the president comes out and says that aliens are here. Okay, So to me, the scale of the news, to me, it's clear that what we're talking about is completely real. So it is going to reformulate everything that humans know, but you have to be sensitive to what the societal pace is. You have to allow for it, and you have to let it digest with the speed that it. And if it needs a little bit of encouragement, it will be very clear that that encouragement is needed now, and then we'll deliver the encouragement. But currently, we're going to keep working at it. We're going to keep making information available, and we'll let people digest in the speed that it's comfortable for them.
I love it, and I'll close with that message. I think it's great. Thank you so much for your time, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate you, brother.
See you on another occasion.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Hold on. I will. So we'll. Oh, I think. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. So when we shut the conversation, we'll start encoding, and then I'll put it on Dropbox and I'll share it with you.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thanks.
It was
Quick
fun.
question.
Yeah.
How do you get DMT? Well, that's the US. I'm in Ecuador because we get it from plants here, but I don't think it's the one we want.
Why not?
I thought you said the one from the frog is actually the one that's
No,
more
5-MeO.
powerful.
5-MeO is yeah. Bufo is the you can see the code with it, but it's a lot harder to like stay focused and awake because it's like you like completely.
Oh,
I would
okay.
also not recommend to do 5-MeO just by yourself if you've never done it before. I definitely recommend to do it with either a shaman or a facilitator or somebody that know what they're doing. And then
And I
yeah,
was having that conversation with you the last time because I did bring somebody to do the shamanic thing because they were very adamant. Like they said, you don't want to bring any entities from the other side. That's. And I was like, yeah, no, I don't want to do that. Let's
it's not even about the entity.
you have your note.
It's not even about the entities. It's also like I guess you can think of it as a concern, but like that's not the main thing for me. The main thing is that with NN, it is already very big, but it's kind of like you can kind of find your pace with it. With 5-MeO, if you've never done it before, man, it's so big. You want someone there who knows what they're doing. It's so big, man. It's that one can jar you. That one can jar you. You need someone to create the right environment and the right for sure.
To contain you.
Contain the process, yeah, and also create the security and the safety, but also to feel like you have a support because it really is like you just shut into infinity and back, and it really is that big. Like, you can't overstate it. So
And one last question: how can we experiment here with the dripping with the one with? Do you know where to start?
I don't know about your country, but like here we do in Colorado, we have a team that does this because it's decriminalized there. In Brazil, you can do it because they do it in universities now. There's a few other places, but yeah, I mean, depend. Like if you're in the U.S., Colorado would be your address because it's and I can connect you with the right people because it's decriminalized there, and you're doing it with professionals. Again, when it comes to intravenous, also I would say you need to do it with a team. Like you shouldn't be doing it by yourself. You need a nurse practitioner there. You need the chemist there. Yeah, yeah. So, mhm. But very
Got
doable.
it. And what they're doing is mapping the other side. Is that
Well,
is that the reason?
DMT, you talk about DMTX as a whole. DMTX is an umbrella name
Yeah.
for all the investigations of DMT in the world that have to do with the ontological question
Oh,
of whether or not the DMT space is actually real. It's happening in Imperial College in London. I think they moved it to a different one now in London, but there's one in London. There's one in San Diego, led by Dr. John Dean. There's a team in Colorado, but that's essentially Kevin and Haley from Dream Lab, um, and they do their own thing, but we're going to be collaborating a lot. So like actually, Code of Reality will probably be leading the investigation in terms of the like that stuff with Kevin and Haley, but they do also do their own thing. So if somebody just wants to do like an extended state, it's purely with them, and I highly recommend them. They're amazing. They're really good at that, and I can definitely connect you with them.
I appreciate it. Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
of course. Well, it was a huge pleasure, brother, and I will email you the conversation.
Thank you. Appreciate it. See you next time.
See you.